What if the jungle didn't just watch you, but whispered your name back? They say the wild is alive, that every sound has a meaning. But what if one night, the forest stopped echoing your footsteps and started matching them instead? Welcome back to Whispering Abyss. Tonight, I've gathered 5 chilling jungle horror stories that dig deep into what hides beyond the trees. From ghost lights that follow explorers, to ancient drums that summon the lost. Every tale tonight pulls you a little further from safety and closer to something that was never meant to be found. So, turn off the lights and listen carefully, because out here in the dark, it's not the animals you should be afraid of. It's what pretends to sound like them. Which story do you think will haunt you the most? Tell me in the comments below. Story 1. The lanterns under the canopy. The first time the lights match my footsteps, I tell myself the jungle is being kind. I stop. They stop. I take a breath. And the air is cool and wet, tasting like metal where the rain has been chewing the canopy all night. Somewhere close, sap is bleeding down a trunk, shining like a strip of moon. Farther off, a bird throws 3 notes into the dark, careful and even like a test. You can tell yourself a lot of comforting things in a place like this, until the forest says your name back. We came for that bird, the rare 3-note nightjar that closes grants and opens doors. I promised Lila we would pack by dawn, get the cards, and bring home the proof before the monsoon makes a mouth of the river. She is sleeping in a double-walled tent a few minutes behind me, a careful sleeper, a precise knot-tier. I trust her hands more than my sense of direction, which is saying a lot in a country that rearranges itself after dark. I do not wake her, because I do not want the look that says I have cut a corner again. The air smells of crushed leaves and damp stone, and under it something sharp, sweet, and out of place. Camphor, a bomb, a temple, a chest of old clothes. It pricks the back of my throat and hangs behind my teeth. My headlamp gathers a tiny cloud of flying dust motes and shows me the rope markers Lila tied yesterday. 3 tight knots, then 2 loose. Her pattern. Inside the beam, tiny drops of resin glitter on a slashed trunk, as if someone's been shaving the jungle in straight lines. At the first recorder, I kneel and listen before I touch it. There's a soft breath on the track that is not mine, not Lila's either, unless she has learned how to exhale like a whisper. I scrub the headphones rim with my thumbs, shake the cable, reset the time code. The track stretches longer than I left it, a few seconds of nothing before the 3 notes come. But the nothing is heavy, like a presence pressed to glass. When the bird sings, the last note pulls a fraction to match the pace of my breathing. You would think that is a trick of nerves. I want it to be a trick. I pop the card into the case, seal it, and check the time on my watch. 1:37 a.m. If I climb the ridge now, I can hit the satellite pass at 2:15 and ping the ranger station. We have one window before the clouds thicken and the rain eats the sky. If I circle down by the river, I will make it by 3 with wet boots and no signal. Safety or the job. I wish I could say I choose safety. The short path rides the ridge like a spine, slick and narrow and lined with saplings that all want to lean on you. The lights reappear between the trunks, pearly and patient. 3 of them in a row at my height, another low to the ground. Fireflies do not float this still, and no human hand holds a lantern so long without a tremor. I take 3 steps, they take 3. I plant the heel and pivot, and feel the leaves pull under my boot, and in that pull the lights pause, exact, as if they are counting the length of my shadow. Is that even possible, or am I begging for patterns? A metallic clink reaches me from the left, same rhythm as a 3-note call. Fresh cuts on bark gleam like wet teeth, neat, recent. Illegal loggers, I think. That would explain the lights, the way they space themselves, the drone I have been trying to ignore, like a generator muffled under vines. I move the headlamp and see a scarf of resin painted along a trunk at shoulder height, catching the beam and throwing it back as a perfect circle. Someone is playing with reflections, or someone has learned to arrange them. At recorder 2, the SD card metadata stretches across the hiss like a rope over a ravine. There are extra timestamps. Past when I placed it, past when I left, past midnight, past my memory. The playback begins with insects, then rain, then a voice that is almost Lila's but softer, like the shape of her mouth without the strength of her lungs. Arif, it says, Arif, as if the name is round and needs rolling. I stare at the digital readout and find my own name where there should be numbers. The battery indicator on my sat phone dips 10% as the lights slide closer. If you have ever heard your name the wrong way, you know how your bones want to answer. I cup a hand over the mic and whisper back because the idea of Lila lost in the dark has been living in my chest since last year's mistake. I say I am here, and the lights rush forward by a half step, and the sat phone drops again, and the 3-note call pulls the last note longer, a little caricature of the last syllable in my name. It is friendly. It is not friendly. It wants an answer that is not a whisper. The rope markers ahead are tied differently now. Same vine, same hands, a pattern that makes my mouth go dry. 3 tight knots, 2 loose, but then an extra loop that bites like a hook. Whoever retied them wants me off the river loop and into the null clearing, which is a name Lila's circle on the map with a small frown yesterday. The metallic clink comes again, and I find it swinging from a branch at eye level, a steel hook, polished and useless, hung like a wind chime in a place with no wind. I tap it. The sound is wrong for metal, more like bone dresses metal. When I lose the station beacon, I know I have made the smallest mistake that is going to cause the biggest regret. The light that tells me which way home is flicks twice and dies. And in the sudden absence, my headlamp seems very small, a little human idea pretending to hold back a continent. I tell myself the station probably powered down to save the battery for the morning. I tell myself the ranger is taking a nap with the radio on his chest. You can drown in the things you tell yourself if you do not pick one and stand on it. Lila's field notebook hangs from a forked branch at the height of my throat. It is bone dry and mist that slicks every other surface. My name is on the top of my own handwriting, which is impossible because I do not write that tidy and never that straight in the dark. The entry below it describes what I am doing right now, down to the way I rub my temple when I am about to change a battery. I run a finger over the ink. No smear. The page smells faintly of camphor, like a drawer that was just open in an empty room. When I speak the second time, I do it without meaning to. Lila, I say. It is a question inside her name. It sounds small coming out, like the jungle eats most of it, and only the seed makes it to the other side. The reply is perfect. It is not near or far. It is the shape of her voice if her voice were a coat hung on a nail. Cut the knots, Arif. Please. The 5 knotted vine snakes across the trail, and up around a sapling like a net that forgot to fish. My headlamp drops to 20% as the sat phone flickers in my pocket. The radio crackles a mile of static in a single breath and then goes quiet. The satellite pass comes and goes. My watch taps 2:16 and keeps going. Somewhere deeper, water starts to talk to itself in a new tone. The rain has a second room now, behind the first. My choices collapse to one sharp point. Behind me is a ridge that slides like a wet spine. Ahead is a knot pattern that wants to be cut. If that voice is Lila, I have left her in a cage. If it is not, I am about to open one. When the blade bites the vine, it feels like cutting a living thing that has been waiting a long time to be freed. All the lanterns go dark in the same instant, as if they were listening for that exact sound and had rehearsed their response. The sudden black is a kind of touch. The only light left is mine, small and stubborn, looking for a partner. I hold the cut end in my hands and smell the camphor again, stronger and sharper, like the inside of a bottle under my nose. The 3-note call starts to ring, too precise to be wild. In the clearing, the circle reveals itself slowly. 10 of our recorders, or 10 that look like ours, sit on stakes at hip height, their LEDs dim as eyes half open. They are playing breath, not words, not animal noises, just a soft pull and push of someone standing very near a microphone and waiting to speak. In the gaps between those breaths, there's a shape. The extra seconds from the first recorder were not nothing. They were bites taken from silence. It is a thought that makes my back shorten and my tongue dry because it changes the way my own pauses feel. People think the jungle is sound. It is also quiet, and the quiet is where the jungle lives. Something here is hungry for that quiet. It has learned the spaces after names and before the next sentence, and it has built a body out of reflections to get close to the mouths that make them. The lanterns are not lamps. The resin streaks on cut bark are rings arranged to catch my headlamp and promise a human hand. They learn your distance by stealing the length of your shadow. They drink the room between the word and the answer. Do I know how that sounds? I do. I also know the hook I saw earlier is a trick meant to sell the story of loggers. The drone resolves now into a phasing of insects, 2 species beating their wings against each other to make a third sound that fools your brain into hearing a machine. The footprints that looked human do a heel-forward dance and then stop at bark, which is not a thing feet do unless feet are ornaments. There is no fuel smell, no oily taste of the air, only rain and resin, and the ghost of camphor on the back of the tongue. The voice uses me next. Arif. It says in my exact tone, lazy edge, city vowels worn thin by a year in the field. Do you want to live? It is a question that would be funny anywhere else. My watch reads 2:53. The river is starting to think about entering rooms it does not belong to. The sat phone dies in my pocket like a small animal that does not know it has stopped moving. The headlamp drops to 15% and then to 12%, and the lights at the ring edge adjust, as if my dimming is a polite question they want to answer. There is one thing I have that they want. Not the recorders, not the cards, not my voice, which they already wear. They want the last good circle. I have one. It is on my wrist. I did not put it there. The 5-knotted vine is damp and warm against my skin, and I do not remember when it appeared. 3 tight, 2 loose. It smells like Lila's salve jar when she rubs her wrists after a day in the field. Camphor. I uncap the tin from my pocket, swipe 2 fingers across the paste, and smear it along the vine until it glistens. When I swing my arm to the lanterns, they do not follow where I go. They follow where the camphor says I am. For a second, the distance they keep from me doubles in the wrong direction. The circle inhales. I throw my headlamp into a resin streak, and it catches a beam and makes a new body for me, a shadow twice as long as I am, standing where I am not. The light stepped toward the sculpture of me, and I stepped toward a real path, which is not a path but a seam where the silence is thin. You might think this is clever. It is a trick you forget as soon as your heart starts working again. The bird call becomes a metronome, 3 notes, and then a longer third, and then a little hitch that is the shape of my breath. The resin rings blink like eyes in a storm. I grab the last intact knotted vine at the clearing edge and whip it across the reflections, breaking their perfect geometry with a cheap smear. The headlamp dies in mid-swing, and for 1 second, I feel the jungle see me for what I am, which is a soft thing that learned how to make rectangles of light. Water reaches the path like a hand. The first touch is cool. The second is impatient. The third climbs the shin. My watch ticks over 3 o'clock, and a tree somewhere upstream decides it is tired of holding on. The crash rolls to the clearing in slow motion, leaves holding the sound a moment too long, and then letting it go. I think about turning and retrieving the recorders. I think about never telling anyone where this clearing is. I think about Lila's face if I come back with stories and no cards, and the funding call that will not be returned. The voice that wears me steps closer. It is curious more than hungry. It says my name like a friend would, and the last syllable curls like a hook. My mouth opens and closes and opens again, because the shape of my name wants the next word. The trick here is older than the path, older than the river. It is the done space where humans say yes to keep a conversation from breaking. I fill that space with nothing. I press my tongue to the roof of my mouth and hum, so the inside of my head vibrates and the outside cannot have the quiet. When I step backward, I can feel the circle, try to decide if I have moved. The camphor on my wrist confuses it, tells two truths. I slide through a wet breath of leaves and find a slope that wants me to fall fast. I sit instead and go down on my left hip like a child. The river meets me with both arms. The jungle presses me against its ribs and tells me a story about rocks. I file each impact under the kind of pain that becomes a bruise and not a break, and let the current walk me to the only place I can think of. Home is the ranger's dull metal door. It is almost dawn when the station coughs its light back onto the veranda. A shape sits on the step, knees to chest, hair like a wet rope over one shoulder. Lila, she does not look at me for a full 10 seconds. When she does, her eyes are not surprised to see me. She says she never left camp. She shows me the sat phone log on her screen, all failed pings from my number, one after another, as if I were standing outside a wall and tapping just once at a time. She smells like smoke and wet cloth. No camphor. Inside, we lay the recorders out on the table with our hands, on either side like parents at a conference. The cards hold something we cannot keep, breath mostly, the bird sometimes, and quiet, curated into a shape that makes the hair on my arms rise. On one card there is a page from a notebook that should not be a sound at all, but is. You can hear paper moved by a hand that writes like mine, the little squeak the pen makes when I press too hard on the downstroke of an R. It reads like a transcript of a dream I have not had yet. You want me to tell you we deleted it. We should have. We did not. I put the page in my pocket later, while Lila argued with the radio about a helicopter that is not coming until noon. It is there when I check, folded twice, dry and clean and smelling like camphor. The vine on my wrist has begun to loosen. I do not remember untying it or pulling it tight. I count the knots. 3 tight, 1 loose. I close my eyes and try again. 3 tight, 1 loose. I know there should be 2 loose. 1 is missing. At noon, a light appears inside the ranger window and holds steady even when the fan stirs the papers on the desk. It is small and exact like a marble with moon inside. There is no resin here, no cut bark, just glass, dust, and the slow heat of a day that wants to collapse the cloud into the ground. The light looks at us. It holds the same distance it held in the jungle. It is not a trick of angle. It is not a reflection from my watch or from the tin of salve. I move left. It moves right. I stop. It stops. It is polite. That is the part one cannot explain to anyone who has not been counted. The politeness. The way a thing gives you the edges of your own life back, as if it has been keeping them for you while you slept. Lila does not speak for a long time. When she does, she asks me a question that slants sideways. Arif, she says, in her own voice, not the borrowed one. When you went out, did you tie anything to yourself? I want to say no, but I can feel the memory of a knot in my palm. I can feel the way a loop tightens when it has been cut. At dusk, the river takes a path, and the path takes a radio line, and the radio line takes the last clear thought I had about what is and is not possible. We sit with headlamps off to save the batteries and watch the light in the window, decide if it wants to be patient for another night. The bird sings 3 notes from a tree that cannot hold it, because the bird is a patient thing that waits for a mouth to make a pause. I hear my name in the last syllable, the way you hear your own heartbeat in the pillow. If you have ever felt watched by a room, you know this feeling. I tell myself that in the morning we will go back and gather every recorder and cut every ring of resin and tie new knots and close the circles we should not have opened. I tell myself we will leave the cards and take the silence. I tell myself the page will curl and brown and stop smelling like camphor if I leave it near the stove. The word I am not saying is yes. The word the jungle is waiting for is yes. I keep my teeth closed around it like a seed I am not ready to plant. If you listen to this and it sounds like a warning, good. If it sounds like an invitation, that is on you. There's 1 vine on my wrist with 4 knots that used to be 5, and I have not found where the missing one went. Maybe it is still in the clearing, humming along with the metronome bird. Maybe it followed us and is waiting for a breath to slip into. Maybe it was never a knot at all, but a mouth. At noon tomorrow, I will stand at the window and count how many lights know my name. Story 2. The drums that answered back the first drumbeat did not come from any human camp. It came from the ground under my feet, a single low thud that passed through my boots and sat in my ribs like a second heart. The night held its breath afterward, and so did I. Wet leaves pressed scent into the air, clay and smoke, like someone had put out a fire with their bare hands. You might think it was a trick of roots, or my nerves leaning into the wind. I thought the same, until the second beat answered the rhythm of my own pulse. My name is Nadia. I study the way people sing to the world, and how the world answers back. This jungle was meant to be a field site, not a test. Victor, my local guide, walks with the confidence of someone who knows which trees have opinions. He keeps his black thread charm tucked around his wrist like an apology to something we cannot see. We came for the answering drums, a pattern the elders refuse to play now that relocation papers have been signed. Last night before the trucks. Last window before the tide fills the only road out. Victor said we could listen if we did not record, which was another way of saying do not steal voices. I told him sound belongs to no one, and I heard how sharp that sounded. I have chased proof for years. Promises turn to grants, and grants turn into rooms where your name is said with respect or with pity. I needed a clean take before dawn. That is how people like me get to keep jobs in tiny apartments that smell like coffee and dust. That is how people like me say we were here without carving our initials into a tree. I set a microphone between 2 carved trunks. Ears were cut into the wood, not eyes. Long listening spirals that made my fingers itch when I traced them. I tapped the gore with my knuckle. The sound bloomed and went away. Then the recorder in my headphones held silence too long, like it was thinking, and slipped in 2 extra beats that were not mine. The pattern matched my breath. Inhale, exhale, 1, 2. Victor's hand hovered near my wrist, like he was waiting to pull me back from a curb. He sniffed the air and said camphor. I smelled clay and the ghost of smoke. Which detail was wrong? We passed a hut used long ago for ceremonies. Its roof had slouched into itself like a tired animal. Inside, a drum frame leaned against a wall, where soot had stained a circle. The skin was cracked but stretched tight in places. It was pale. My gaze knew what my mouth would not say. A scar ran across it that looked exactly like mine from a kitchen accident when I was a child. Victor turned it away from me as if closing a curtain. He breathed on the black thread around his wrist and said he was not afraid, which is a sentence people say when they are. I tested the equipment with a simple pattern. 4 beats, a rest, then 2. The speakers gave me back a perfect echo after a heartbeat and a half. That made sense. Even birds bounce themselves off the forest to see who else is listening. I changed tempo. The echo changed. I doubled the speed and added a grace note that would trip a beginner. The echo was not a beginner. It shaded my mistake before I made it. My throat went dry. Victor stood behind me and said, very quietly, "They think you are challenging them." I wanted to laugh, not because it was funny, but because I could already imagine the look a reviewer would give me for writing that sentence. They think you are challenging them. Who is they, Nadia? What is your evidence, Nadia? I bled a drummer's rudiment into the night and waited. The answer came faster than physics ought to allow, as if the trees had moved closer. The pause after grew heavier, and the clay smell thickened. Someone was adding smoke to the air where there was no fire. I told myself it was damp earth and my nerves inventing heat. Night folded itself tighter. The tide was turning in the estuary, and I could hear the river begin to change its opinion about where it belonged. The road out would be under water by dawn. I set a second mic near a low pit where gourds lay like eggs. When I played back the last take, a whisper rode the rhythm. Not layers of leaves, but language formed in air. Why do you ask what you do not want to know? It said, each word wrapped around a beat. It was not a voice that belonged to any person I had met, and yet it knew how to stand where my breath would catch. I listened again with my fingertips pressed to my carotid. My heartbeat had been printed onto the track as a separate line, soft and precise, like it had walked out of my neck and set up a chair near the microphone. There was faint but steady, more faithful than my own listening. Victor reached for the recorder and pulled his hand back like he had been shocked. "Don't leave the gaps," he said. "Do you understand? If you leave them, something will step into them." He touched his thread and did not say who. We circled the camp. The drum beats moved with us, not in straight lines, but in rounding spirals. Every time we paused to listen, the waiting grew loud enough to hum in my gums. I told myself there were people in the dark playing games with us. Rival musicians, maybe. Victor had a cousin angry about the relocation payout. They could copy our patterns and slip away before we found their fire. Human motives are so tidy when you lay them out like that. I checked the ground for prints to test my tidy thought. The mud around the pit showed a line of steps that made my brain tilt. They were heel first, flat, too long to be bare feet, and too smooth to be boots. When I picked one with my light, I could not make sense of the depth. The toe indent looked higher than the heel, like someone had walked upside down while making very careful human shapes. A carved ear on a trunk glistened. I touched the sap bead. It slid down with a slowness that made me think about blood without ever seeing any. Victor's breath snagged. He was not looking at the tree. He had untied his charm. The black thread hung from his fingers, frayed from a lifetime of superstitions. "If I break it and nothing happens," he said, "then we can go, and you can tell your professors a man you did not trust made you turn back. If I break it and something happens, then we go, and you tell them the forest said no." He snapped the knot, and the thread fell like a dead ant. For a second, nothing happened. Then the nearest gourd thudded once without being touched. Victor flinched and smiled like he had scared himself on purpose. I kept time. That is what I do. I place bodies in sound and measure the space between. The jungle answered in a ring, not a line. The drum beats circled so that no matter where I pointed my light, the strongest beat was always just at my peripheral. The tide licked the edge of my boot. I checked my watch. I counted back from the time the road would disappear and try to fit the remaining patterns into what was left. You cannot bargain with water, but you can time your apologies. We lost a sat phone to a white hiss that seemed to arrive on a drumbeat. Every time I tried for a signal, the answering pattern grew more curious, as if it could smell the outbound request and wanted the taste of it. I realized something that felt like shame. When I answered, the rhythm stayed rhythm. When I fell silent, words began to form. The sentence in the whisper, the one about questions, had appeared after my pause. Silence was not safe. Silence invited it closer. I kept my hands moving not because I wanted to record music, but because I was afraid to stop. In the hut, I checked the cracked drum skin again. The light made the scar jump up to meet me. I pressed my fingers over my own old wound and felt a shrug of recognition, like touching a mirror in an unsteady elevator. The smell of camphor was stronger, the inside of a balm jar opened by someone's grandmother's hands. It was a temple smell inside a house that had not held prayer in a long time. I wanted to name every detail until the fear had no place to sit. I wanted that and did not get it. Victor was gone when I stepped back into the clearing. The word gone is too sudden for how it happened. He was present, and then he was elsewhere, like someone had moved him on a board in a game without my permission. The thread lay where he had dropped it, black and slack, and splayed like legs. Inverted footprints led toward the pit. The gourds inside were moving. They did not rock or slide. They lifted and settled like breathing. A carved ear beside the pit dripped sap faster, and when it reached the ground, the drop kept its shape as if the air had stiffened around it. The drum spoke my name, not mocked it, not mangled it. They said it the way my mother did when she was worried and did not want to show it. The pattern that carried it was a steady march, simplified and faithful, a mnemonic that would teach a child a name by pressing it into the air over and over until it stuck. I answered by not answering. I played a pattern a child would call a dare. The reply did not change because it did not need to. My throat closed. Maybe that is why people tie charms to their wrists, to give their hands something to do when their mouths have quit. My torch began to flicker with each beat, not as a coincidence, but as if something had linked the battery to the rhythm. The light dimmed on the downbeat and lifted on the rest. I felt ridiculous wanting to apologize to the companies that made my equipment, because nothing in the warranty covers this. The tide whispered yes to the road, and the road whispered yes back. The window was closing. I wanted to shout for Victor, but I knew what kind of invitation that would be. The question in the whisper would only need a word to become a door. I lowered the microphone into the pit to test the depth of the beat. The line trembled like a taut string, then steadied, then trembled again. On the headphones, a second voice slid through the rhythm. "Stop and you stay," it said. The sentence had the weight of a rule, not a threat. I picture 1,000 people over 1,000 nights, each leaving a little of themselves in the gap after that line. That is why I study this. Not to prove anything, but because a shared rule is a kind of proof. It tells you where humans end and something else begins. I had a choice: stop and test a warning with my life, or play one last pattern to mislead the room that had grown around us. I changed my rhythm mid-beat, not a flourish, a fail. I let my heart stutter on purpose and fed that skip into my hands. I shoved wrongness into grids so deep that any echo would have to decide if I was dying. For a moment in the forest, heartbeat paused. It was not silence. It was a tilt that comes just before you drop off the step you forgot was there. Then the answering pattern matched my fake falter beat for beat. The pit glowed a dull red like the last coal in a fire that refuses to stop being a fire. Victor lay in the hollow, hands raised as if he had just finished a phrase and wanted me to wait before I clapped. His eyes were almost closed. His chest did not move. the gourds pulsed in a way that made counting feel rude. I wanted to go to him, and knew that going in would make me part of the same sentence. The idea of words and bodies sharing a grammar made me lightheaded. My pattern was still playing, except my hands were at my sides. The recording I had made earlier looped from a speaker I had left set to monitor. My fake heart attack had become a perfect bait. I stared at the levels. They climbed and fell in time with a rhythm that did not need me anymore. The echo we had been courting had a new partner now. It was answering the recording that kept calling. The invitation had not been the beats themselves. The invitation was hitting record and offering a clean place for the reply to live. I understood this with a bitter clarity. You do not get to make a mirror and then be surprised that something leans in. I picked up Victor's broken charm threads. They felt damp and heavy, like they knew they were supposed to hold something and had failed. I wrapped them around the microphone head, bound the cable, and tied everything to a river stone. My hands acted faster than my fear. I buried the whole lash under packed clay at the pit edge, pressing until the threads ground into the dirt like roots. The monitor cut to a thin howl, and then to nothing. The drum beat stepped back a fraction, as if someone polite had been told the shop was closed. The forest did not go silent. It returned to itself, which is scarier if you have been paying attention. The tidy, ordinary sounds came back in right order. Frogs did their unkind laughter. Leaves applauded nothing. My torch steadied. The tide did not speed up or slow down because of my relief. It kept its appointment with the road. I looked at Victor. I set his name into the place where the new pattern ought to have been. My voice sat there without being dressed in rhythm. It is a terrible privilege to hear your words fall and stay fallen. We carried him without saying if he was heavy or light. Something in my head kept time for the two of us, as if afraid that the quiet might fill with a promise I had just broken. At the river's edge, water climbed my shins and then my knees, and tried to climb higher with the cheerful insistence of a child who does not know you are tired. We found a branch long enough to make a stretcher. Once, the path narrowed to a shoulder's width, and I felt the air thicken in my left ear where a carved wooden ear had been watching all night. Sap glittered like a tear that would not fall. Dawn pushed up a pale edge on the river. The tide let go of the road without apology. A search boat thudded against the bank, like it had been answering us all along. Men in bright vests said words that did not fit the night we had just crossed. They laid Victor on a tarp and counted to 3 and lifted, as if counting would give them more hands. I placed my microphone in my lap and stared at its red light. It was on. It had been on for hours. The file counter ticked in polite seconds that made no sense. Back at the base, I hit play and heard nothing. A long, clean nothing. It recorded silence that should not have existed in that place at that time. When they checked my pulse with a stethoscope, the nurse frowned and tilted her head and smiled like someone listening for a train. She asked if my heart always double beat at rest. I said no and felt a second tap, like an echo that had moved inside. I erased the files. I held the trash icon down as if my finger had weight. The laptop made a polite chime that did not sound like victory. For days, I was a person who hears drums and appliances. Air conditioners made menacing promises. Elevators learned Polyrin. Auto traffic became ritual. I told myself it would pass. It did not pass. On a morning made of practical errands, I visited the city museum to fill out forms about collections and community partnerships and how to label the thing we were not going to display. In the sound gallery, a new kiosk had been installed. No title card, just a button and a sign that said, "Listen." I put the headset on because I am not always kind to myself. My field recording, the one I had deleted, played on loop, It was not a copy I had shared. The metadata had no author. It did not ask permission to exist. When I took the headset off, another visitor put it on and pressed a button and waited for the same nothing I had promised on my report. Their eyebrows lifted. They began to tap a finger against their thigh. On beat, I smelled clay and the ghost of smoke. Somewhere in the building, a janitor had opened a cabinet with a camphor block inside and then shut it quickly, and the smell did not know which room it belonged to. If you have ever lied to yourself professionally, you know the taste of this moment. I found the audio office and asked, too bright, where the file had come from. The tech shrugged. It had appeared on the server midweek, as if a grant had cleared. No sender, no hash history. The museum is a hungry thing that loves to make a body for whatever arrives. The kiosk served the sound without asking if it should. That is what institutions do when you hand them appetite dressed as knowledge. They believe the mouth is a library. At night, when I breathed too fast, I could hear a faint percussion under my own breath, like a wooden spoon tapping the side of a pot far away. It is not loud. It does not show up on normal days. It waits for me to hurry. Sometimes I think I feel the floor answering with a small patience that belongs in the jungle. Sometimes I think this is what it means to have been heard by something that does not mind waiting. If you're listening to me and you hear a beat begin in your room that was not there before, check your breath and ask yourself why you're holding it. I do not know who uploaded the file. I do not know how to delete a sound that belongs to more than a device now. I know what the elders meant when they said the answering drums belong to those who mocked the old gods. It is not a threat. It is a sentence about how questions can become doors when you say them out loud into a room that hears only invitations. I keep the broken black thread in my pocket and sometimes tied around my wrist on the train, a bracelet for a person who needs to remember to count. I still hear Victor's voice in the half-sleep early morning gives you, asking if I've learned anything worth the price. I say yes because I am a coward who wants the night to end. I say no because I am a scientist who likes clean notes. I say nothing because the word that makes doors is the easiest one we own. Stop and you stay. The recording whispered. I did not stop when it mattered, and now I am learning how to go on without finishing the sentence. It is a skill you can practice anywhere, even here. Story 3, Nightwalkers of the Green River at night. The river learned how to walk. That was the first wrong thing, and it arrived as a rhythm instead of a shape. The fog lifted in slow drifts, green at the edges where the algae pulsed, and in that glow I heard splashes that didn't spread like ripples so much as footsteps taken by water. If you have ever felt a room breathe back at you, you know how I felt standing there with a sampling pole and a recorder that suddenly seemed too bright in my hand. I am Elias, hydrologist by training, professional doubter by habit. Dr. Serena Kale calls me her proof engine. She keeps our project honest even when I am wrong, which happens more quietly than I admit. Hemi, our boatman, talks to the river like an old roommate who still uses your coffee mug. He is not afraid. He is respectful. I tell myself there is a difference, and I can taste a lie like metal when the fog rolls back upriver instead of down, breathing against the current as if it is lungs. Our job is simple on paper. The Green River Basin has been lighting up satellites at night. My pitch was elegant. Oxygen depletion, unique bioluminescent algae, a nocturnal bloom, making ghosts of the shallows. We set our window from 2 to 4 in the morning to catch the peak. The funding wants numbers, not stories. I say this out loud to calm my hands. Serena nods and sets the first sond. Hemi cuts the motor and lets the current carry us into the sound of footsteps you cannot unhear once you decide they are feet. The sonar pings a vertical shape in the surface film. A line, a pause, a line again, small as a child, then tall as a man, then gone. I check it twice because I want to be in error. Serena tilts her head and listens, as if the instrument has decided to talk in a language it promised not to use. Hemi taps the gun with one knuckle, a superstition that feels like a door left just barely open. The reeds answer with a dry whisper that spells nothing and somehow sounds like the last words I said. Stretch thin. Green light slips under the fog like veins under skin. Algae, I tell myself, thrilled despite myself by the perfect science of it. I drop a glow stick to test flow. It floats upstream against the current, serene as a paper crane lifted by a hand I can't see. That is not possible, not even in the category where impossible means you forgot a variable. Serena writes a note in pencil because ink runs in this air. The pencil line looks like a heartbeat fighting through sleep. I add to my own notes, careful and sober, anomalous upstream drift. Recheck instruments. The reeds start whispering back what we say. Not echoes. A beat late and wrong in the way a child is wrong when they remember only the last soft part of a sentence. I tell Serena to mark the frequency of the whisper. The reeds give the instruction back in her tone. Mark the frequency of the whisper. They say, kind and flat. Hemi squeezes his charm under his shirt and pretends it is to settle the fabric. When the fog breathes, our breath reaches for its timing, as if they're the right way to exhale. We find the first footprints on the water at 2:37 a.m. I write that down exactly because I do not want to soften the shape with metaphor when the truth is already ridiculous. Human stride stitch the fog near the far bank, heel to toe, no ripple, only light blooming on each step and dimming when the next begins. I have a stupid thought that the river wouldn't dare carry weight like that without complaint. Then a silhouette passes to the glow, and the glow holds its shape around it like a custom-cut suit, and I forget how to blink. Serena lifts her head like she hears her name, and her voice answers from both banks at once. Her tone from the left says, hold position, and her tone from the right says, kill the motor. Both are her. Both are wrong, not in sound but in sequence, as if the words remembered their owner but not the order they were supposed to stand in. I mark the angles, the reflections, the plausible illusions that keep people like me employed. Hemi whispers that the river keeps count. He doesn't know if we're new math or old debt. I drop the hydrophone and listen. On the recording, Serena gives a line of field notes she hasn't said tonight, crisp as chalk. They walk because they forgot how to drown. She will swear later she never said those words. I will swear I heard them just after her voice split. There are stories rivers tell themselves when no one is listening. Sometimes I think science is apologizing for not being invited to those conversations. I note the time and feel my watch fog from inside, a film under the glass like a fingertip on the wrong side of a window. Warm stones rattle in Hemi's pocket. He brings them for luck. He says, flat river ovals that feel like bread pulled from an oven when the moon is high. He places one in my palm, and it pulses once, twice, then again, taking my pulse as if measuring me for a coat. I want to toss it, and do not, because the gesture would mean fear, and I am not ready to wear my fear in front of these people. Serena gives me a look that says, say the thing you are not saying. I say, it's thermogenesis. Then I do not write that down. Our stern line grates suddenly, not a fray, but a cut. I yank the rope from the cleat and find fibers sheared clean, as if a blade decided to pass through only the strands and not the space between them. That is a seed I pretend not to plant. Hemi reaches for the motor. The silhouettes freeze, then divide, one form becoming two, like a reflection deciding it will prefer to be a person. I sweep the lamp across the fog. Faces turn where faces should not turn. One of them wears my bone structure badly, like water remembering me with poor lighting. Let them pass. Hemi says, "Do not add breath." Serena's hand stops him from touching the switch. "We are not here to perform," she says. Her voice is the best knife I know. I should follow it. I should be her proof engine and sit still. The footsteps come closer, and the green light outlines our hull like a chalk drawing on a stone that cannot hold chalk. The reeds are done whispering us back. They are repeating silence now, a crisp pressing of nothing into nothing that somehow grows louder than everything else. We try to radio and get laughter that is not laughter so much as bubbles popping in a line that wants to be a joke. GPS loops our position back on itself like a snake eating its own tail. Serena pulls out the compass we promised we would only use if our tech failed. The needle flutters toward north and then past, then breaks under the glass with a pop that cuts a thumb. Blood beads and hisses when it hits the river, a sound I don't have a category for. We wrap her hand and pretend the steam is breath the water borrowed. The fog swells at 3 a.m. on the punctual as a meeting I don't want to attend. I hate that about it. The precision feels personal. The world disappears to the length of my arm. Our shapes shrink to audio. I can tell where Serena is by the sound of pressure on wet wood, and where Hemi is by the thread noise of his charm sliding. The footsteps are all around now, not touching us, not ignoring us, keeping a courtesy distance as if the river understands social space. My watch ticks forward, then pauses. When it starts again, it is a minute earlier. "Anchor," Serena says. "We stay until dawn." I should nod. I should be the person she hired. Instead, I see the green thread running upstream, brighter now, like a vein under thin skin, and I think about publishing first and saving her grant and proving that light is reasons. My chest tightens around a sentence I have said too many times. We cannot lose the trail. I make the decision before I know I have made it. We follow, I say. The words leave my mouth like birds that have forgotten the way home. Hemi's face goes still. He doesn't argue. He just unties the anchor line and lets it slip quietly into the water like someone removing a bandage without waking a patient. The fog closes behind us and around us, and the footsteps resettle at our flanks like ushers in a theater, making sure we find our seats. The reeds fall silent. No more whispers. That is worse than anything they said. A recorder in my lap wakes up and displays a fresh log entry I have not made. Timestamp, 3:10 a.m. content. Fog density 0. Status, shoreline detected. I look at the fog that would hide a ship and try not to swear. The green trail leads to a pier that hasn't had a name in decades. Old pilings lift out of the water at knee height, chewed and patient. Each flat top wears a little halo of algae, a saint of river rot. Footsteps echo on the boards from no visible feet, and the sound arrives a half second before my boot hits wood, as if someone is walking for me faster than I can. My stomach drops. I step back. The echo steps back first. Serena is at my shoulder, or her breath is. She says my name, and my name comes back, softer, behind me. My double emerges from the fog and waits like a polite host. He is me in the way a memory is you if you explain it out loud to someone who doesn't know the story. Every movement is a hair early, a rehearsal. He is made of light and wetness and the odd emphatic darkness where eyes would be if water could consent to hold shape. He does not blink because I do not blink, and for a moment that feels like control before it turns into something else. If you have ever watched yourself on delay in a mirrored video call, you know the wrongness, but this one breathes. Serena appears beyond him, or a shape wherein her outline does, and her mouth forms a sentence I can read even before the fog carries it. Don't breathe. She is not joking. The river is a lung and the fog is its breath, and the algae react to carbon dioxide like hungry bees to sugar. The shapes we have been chasing are what happens when too much of our life pours into the air and decides to keep a copy. This is why their footprints leave light. This is why the reeds learned our lines. This is why the rope cut without a blade. Because it met a border where matter gives up. I hold my breath until my lungs claw at my ribs. The double blurs, then drains, then stands uncertain. The warm stones in my pocket pop once, like knuckles, then go cold, their little heartbeats are fused. I can hear my pulse in my ears, the locomotion of a frightened animal that has been given a hallway and told to run. I try to walk backward without giving the river my exhale. Dizziness pots over my eyes like ink. My hands learn how big my body is and where its edges are. This is a knowledge you only get on the night you didn't want to die. I fail. At the top of the pier, the black in my vision pulls the plug on my good intentions, and I breathe out. It is small, a thin string of air, but it is mine, and it is enough. The double rushes forward in a glide that is both graceful and wrong. Half a second early is always. Crossing space between us in a movement that ignores the planks I need to stand on. Hemi yanks my collar, so hard the seam pops. Serena grabs my wrist, and the watch fogs over completely from the inside, numbers running backward like fish in a school turning at once. The rope on our bows snaps the way a thought breaks. We are loose. The footsteps fall in with us, not escorting, not hunting, simply keeping time. The river's metronome satisfied that we have chosen a tempo. I laugh, a short, stupid sound that throws a spark into the fog. They forgot how to drown, I hear myself say, and I do not know if I am quoting a recording or the river is letting me borrow a line, so it can see how my mouth shapes it. Serena shushes me without moving her lips. Her reflection in the water below us lifts its head out of the surface and exhales a thread of mist that isn't ours. It takes time to drift into morning, and time in fog is not a number. It is a substance, and it sticks to your skin and to your thoughts in a way that makes every second feel like it wants to repeat. Hemi hums under his breath, an old thing that does not want us to hear it. The footsteps thin, then space out, then become only too near the stern. Mine and mine, a half second apart. I stare down and see myself lagging. The lag frightens me more than the lead. It implies I am following. It implies I always was. We wash ashore in a pocket of reeds that remember nothing about last night. Our boat kisses mud with a sound that makes me think of a child pressing a cheek to a window. Hemi finds me on the bank, soaked and steaming, lungs full of air and throat raw from not using it right. His hands are very gentle. He does not ask about Serena. He does not say her name. I do not, either, because I can still hear it in the reed whisper, and I do not want to feed the shapes with a syllable the river learned to love. Back at camp, her field notebook rests on the table, dry in a rain that made everything else surrender. A small mercy or a message. I flip it open. The last page is blank, except for a drawn line that looks like a river walked by feet that forgot their body. My watch has returned to a time that makes sense if you did not live the night we lived. The recorder on my belt plays fog when I press play. When I press pause, footsteps continue for a few seconds and fade like breath leaving a mirror. Hemi will not touch the device. He stands in the doorway as if measuring a room that has new walls. I tell the story to a radio that insists on static, and the static sounds like someone running in place where no ground exists. Later, when the sun insists on noon, I carry the recorder to the edge of the river and threaten to throw it. I do not. I am coward enough to want to keep hearing the evidence that made me wrong. I am brave enough to write it down. I am not either of those things when I catch my reflection in a patch of still water and watch it lift a hand half a second after I do, obedient and late. If you are listening and you think you are safe inland, I want you to consider where your breath goes when you speak. I want you to consider how many rooms hold copies of what you said, because air likes to keep souvenirs. I think the Nightwalkers started as someone like me, with instruments and a promise and a schedule that said 2 to 4 a.m. on a safe blue calendar. I think they took more of themselves out of their bodies than they meant to and left it on the river's lips. I think we found their trail and taught it my stride. At 3 a.m. on the next night, the recorder clicks on by itself. It adds a few more footsteps to a file with my name in the metadata, even though I am asleep, and Hemi swears he turned the power strip off. At 3 a.m. the next night, it adds a few more. If I play the track in the morning, the steps stop when I stop the audio, polite and exact. If I listen at night, they continue for 5 heartbeats after I pause, as if waiting to see if I will give them one more breath. I am trying to decide what kind of apology fits in that space. I used to believe myth was a form of measurement for people who didn't have instruments. I believe now that myth is a report written in a language that does not care if I can read it. The Nightwalkers do not care if I tell you about them. They care that I breathed and that I insisted on following the trail when someone who loved the river told me not to. Hemi is quiet with me the way people are quiet when they have decided to keep you anyway. He brings me a warm stone and asks me if I feel anything. I say no. The stone pulses once, a heartbeat late. We pack for town this afternoon, and the reeds whisper back our inventory in a sing-song meant to teach children how to count. I left a coil of rope on the pier, cut clean, because I cannot carry every version of last night with me. On the bank, green light threaded through the weeds and made small maps I cannot keep. If you stand there at dusk, you can see the route we took like a stitch. And if you breathe too much, you can watch something try to put you on. I can hear Serena in the cover of my head, where mentors go when you let them down, telling me to write what happened and not what I wanted happened. So I will finish like this. Morning comes and I move, and the water returns my face a half-second late. And sometimes I think it is simply light and longing in a scientist's vanity. Other times I think it is a person I should not have left who has learned to walk again and is trying to keep up. You will think what you think. Just don't breathe too much when you decide. Story 4. The mass that grew roots by the time I realized the mass was breathing. It was already wearing me. I did not mean that in the haunted way people tell stories after too much coffee. I mean the wood rose and fell against my palms in a patient rhythm. Warm where bark should be cool, slick where grain should be dry. The air had that thick petrichor before a storm, sweet rot and crushed leaves, and the first lightning was crawling behind the clouds like a thought looking for an exit. Cicadas sang in machine precision, and then fell silent all at once, as if something had cupped the forest in 2 hands and asked it to listen. We were not treasure hunters. I am Clara Voss, ethnobotanist, and I came to the South Orania Basin to document the medicinal flora that school books do not have time to teach. Mateo handled the village archive and told me which trees had names and which names had teeth. The museum had asked for photographs of any artifacts. Not removal, not possession, just images with scale and notes, so the donors could nod about culture and climate control. I promise results by morning. That is the kind of promise that feels light when you make it and heavy when the sky begins to bruise. The mask lay half buried in leaf litter beside a strangler fig, teeth carved in a smile that was too tired to menace. Roots were etched into its cheeks, not decoration, more like veins mapped by a careful hand. I brushed soil away with a paintbrush because that is what you do when something might be old. The paintbrush bristles came back damp. The wood underneath was not. I should have left it there. I took a photo instead. The flash went off, and a fine mist lifted from the eye holes, a pollen breath that sparkled and then disappeared into the humid air like it had somewhere to be. Mateo sucked his teeth. He has this habit when he is holding words he would rather I arrive at without him. He said the equinox storm always did strange things to roots. He said the mask should not be out in this weather. He said it very gently, as if speaking to fever. I said spores. I said some fungi exhale when light changes and heat shifts. I said the museum does not take stories unless they come with slides. He stared at my hands and asked me to put on gloves. The mask rose and fell against the nitrile like a sleeping animal. I photographed the carvings and measured the width at the cheekbones. The teeth were not truly teeth. Grain had been cut to leave gaps like a jaw that wanted to speak and did not. Around the mask, vines shifted in the flash and leaned toward it. Vines do that. It is called kinesis. They reach for heat and light. I noted it and denied the prickling along my forearms that did not care about vocabulary. My camera battery dropped 2 bars an hour, like the mask was a small town pulling power from anything plugged in. I put the camera on the tarp and felt the tarp flutter a little, as if something beneath it had exhaled. That first night we cataloged samples under a canopy, while thunder took attendance at the horizons. My tent seams grew small ridges by morning, then raised lines like the shadows of roots. I ran my fingers along them and told myself the fabric had warped in the humidity. Moisture can do that, particularly when the storm refuses to start and hangs there like a hell breath. Cicadas started their saws. Stopped. Started again. The stop was not a pause. It was a listening. I tried not to hear my own pulse in that gap, because it felt like an invitation. When I lifted the mask onto the scale, the wood was heavier than it should have been for its size. The stitched roots on its surface seemed deeper than the night before, as if someone had gone over the lines of a knife and pushed them into soft meat. I pressed the edge of my thumb to one line, and it bounced back like skin. I told Mateo it was rubbery rot. He told me it was memory. He said the elders called them rooted ones and that their faces returned to bark, so the soil would not forget them. He said museum labels often make graves into decor. I wanted to respect the story, and I wanted to bring back a story that buys a microscope. Those once fought in my mouth. I compromised in the worst way. I moved the mask to the cot, while I cleaned a clear patch of ground to photograph it with scale. When I turned back, it was damp as if someone had breathed into it. The pollen smell had changed. Not sweet anymore, not even sour. It had the sharp, medicinal bite of camphor's cousin, the kind you catch in old trunks and temple clothes. I felt ridiculous for smelling, and more ridiculous for cataloging the scent like it mattered. A thin itch climbed my wrist, then sat there like a line asking to be traced. Under the headlamp, I could see faint ridges under my skin that were not there yesterday. They looked like the mask's carved roots, only paler, a design remembering itself from wood into vein. When I pressed, the skin rolled over them, smooth and wrong. Mateo watched me pretend not to see it. He told the mask he was not asking for anything. He told the mask we were here to look and leave. He told me to stop touching my wrist like a person checking a dangerous watch. We tried to bury the mask at dusk to keep it safe from thieves and whatever else watches camps. Mateo dug with his hands because shovels clang and the forest hears metal from far away. We wrapped the wood in cloth and set it into the ground, and the soil closed like a mouth learning the shape of a word. I felt a peace that was not mine, like the last quiet before decision. We went to sleep. At dawn the mask was on my cot, damp and pulsing, resting at the level of my ribs as if it had risen through floor and air by following the heat of my breath. I do not sleepwalk. I do not hallucinate when tired. Those are the easy explanations I offer myself in a tone no one buys. The camera on my chest blinked a low battery warning and died when I tried to record. Cicadas cut out again, and the forest made the soft creak, which makes when old barns are polite to storms. I lifted the mask, and it whispered. It was not a language. It was the texture of my own voice riding up through a shaped cavity. Hearing yourself in the wrong place is a trick the body hates. My name and my tone said nothing in particular, and I felt my lungs decide to match. Rain started early. First the fat drops that make the dust rise and taste like pennies. Then the fine needles that find their way into any seam and settle on the back of your throat. Lightning strode behind the clouds, and for a second the vines were hands reaching up, not toward us, not toward light, but making a field of fingers to catch something falling. Mateo tried to record growth patterns. He is careful with his notebook, a man who holds history like ceramic, the paper rooted into his palm while he wrote. He hissed and snapped it free and stood with lines impressed in his skin, like a pressed leaf that was not carved but alive. We burn a patch of the new roots because flame is a language everything understands. The smoke did not go in the direction wind asked. It turned itself into a human outline, and then into none, and then into the outline again, thinner each time, like a person strolling away down a corridor until the light swallowed them. The mask's eyes filled with sap lit from within. The glow pulsed to the cadence of my heart. When I took a step back, the pulse lagged and matched. It is a vile honor to be mirrored by wood. Storm noise erased the world and made a small room with wet walls. Our satellite phone became a paperweight under static. Mateo tried to climb for a radio line, and a branch whispered down his shoulder. It glanced off bone and left an ugly bruise. I told him to sit while I strapped a bandage that would be useless in 5 minutes. He sat with his hand on his charm and told me not to lie. He said the vines around my wrists were tightening whenever I promised to return a mask, and meant to keep it until the morning. I had not said I would keep it. I had only thought it. I hate when someone is right about your mouth without hearing it. The mirror in my camera lens gave me back a face that did not belong entirely to me. Beneath the skin around my eyes, a network darkened, fine and patient, branching with a logic I recognized from leaves. The cicadas were silent again. That silence had weight. I picked up the mask to prove I did not care about that weight. The wood inhaled. I exhaled. We matched before I could stop it. There's a reason rituals teach you how to breathe. The first thing anyone takes when they want to change you is rhythm. Mateo told me the truth he did not want to tell. The rooted ones were not decorations or funeral masks. They were planted faces. When someone died unfinished, the elders sealed their features in the bark and buried them to let the forest keep building what life had left undone. Disturb the cycle, and the mask will look for breath to complete it. He said this like he was telling me a recipe, and the ingredients were my eyes and my patience, and the part of me that believes names cannot stick to science. I remembered the museum letter about donors and presentation materials, and hated it for being written in ink. I thought about spores again because spores are a clean problem. Hallucinations would explain whispers. Chemical bonds would explain heat. I cut a sliver of the mask and slid it onto a prepared slide, a cruelty that felt like I was nicking someone's nail while they were sleeping. Under the lens, the tissue was not fungal. It was lignin with cell walls that looked like plant but acted like something that had been taught to carry blood. Hybrid is a word that gets overused. This did not feel like a marriage of kingdoms. It felt like a mistake the world had decided to keep. The equinox turned midnight into a clock with a hand I could hear. I made the choice. I would return the mask to the altar. Nobody takes anything tonight. We go back. We say we are sorry. We put it down and we walk away. Mateo said once it knows your breath, it does not let go. He was bleeding under the bruise, but he stood anyway, because that is the sort of person who becomes a story in a village. My ankles brushed vines that had not been there moments ago. They looped, gentle as a friend. They tightened when I thought about a museum case. The path to the altar is a green tunnel that makes sound tricksy. When you step there at night, You can hear your own breath like it belongs to the leaves. The mask hummed in my hands as thunder approached from a direction thunder does not usually choose. The clearing opened like a mouth teaching a child to say, ah. Lightning laid the world bare for a heartbeat and showed me a nursery of faces grown into trunks. Dozens, hundreds, eyes open, bark fused a cheek and lip, roots stitched down through mouths that were both wood and remembered skin. I stopped because I did not know how to move in a church. Each breath I took tugged the soil. You could see it if you looked directly. The thin threads at the surface quivered and tightened. The roots under my wrists lifted in answer, happy together, like magnets finding the shape of a field. The mask's edges softened and gripped my palms. When I tried to let go, fibers rose and sank into my skin with persuasion of a hook that thinks it is love. The camera flashed once and died. The bright rectangle put a negative on my retinas of my own face bracketed by wood, and then left me blind and dark that had weight. I could hear Mateo moving somewhere behind me, cursing quietly at roots that had pulled through his sleeves and turned his notebook into a leaf that would not let him go. He reached me and tugged, and the mask hummed louder, building pressure, a chest that wanted to match mine and was tired of negotiation. The practical part of my mind made a list of things I had to do. Step, lift, place on altar, cut my hands free, walk away. The list broke when the roots traveled up my forearms in a single smooth motion and wrote a new map under my skin that led only here. The altar was not a stone. It was the belly of the oldest tree, hollowed and kind like grandmother furniture that remembers every back that rested there. I pushed the mask into that cavity with my shaking hands and felt the wood hesitate like an animal brought to water too cold. For a heartbeat it let go. Then it changed its mind. The roots recoiled in the tree and dove into me instead, like a river reversing course to find a warmer bed. I do not scream often. I made a sound that a person would call a scream because language likes to tidy experience. A lightning strike froze our shadows in the clearing, like a photograph burned onto bark. My silhouette looked wrong, a person holding another face in front of their own, and in the negative everything was white where it should be black. The vein patterns that had been subtle erupted across my arms in dark branches that pulsed with my heart. The cicadas went silent with the precision of healthy machinery shutting down. I could hear the storm pausing to listen. I could hear my breath inside the mask and the mask inside my breath, and the overlapping rhythms trying to decide which one was home. I had believed intent would save me, that wanting to return a thing was the same as returning it. I had been arrogant in the tender way that makes people smile at you while they move your hands out of the way. The twist felt like the only honest part of the night. This was not a burial ritual. It was a nursery. The masks were seeds asking the living to finish the pattern that death had begun. Disturb them and they germinate in you. A mercy from a forest point of view, a horror from mine. Mateo pulled hard and something gave. The wood came away. Not all of it came with it. We stumbled out in the rain. It stopped hating us and went back to hating everything equally, a fine equalizer. The vines no longer held my ankles. They stroked them once like a goodbye that might be a see you soon. Back at camp, my cot had 2 old depressions the size of hands where my ribs would lie, and the damp there smelled faintly of skin. The bandage on Mateo's shoulder needed changing, and I did not trust my fingers not to grow something if I touched him for too long. I used the edge of a clean spoon to lift the gauze. Morning came honest. The rescue team made noises that belonged to daylight. They found Mateo awake, laughing at nothing in that way pain prize from good men who do not believe in performative suffering. They asked where I had been, and I said here. They did not say the word shock, but you can smell it on people. We packed the samples that were still samples, and left the things that were now more than samples. In my camera roll, one image developed that none of us remember taking. It showed my face mashed together, not superimposed like a glitch, but braided like two kinds were grown around the same nail. The museum refused to put a label on the mask they claimed they had found. It arrived anonymous, which is always a lie. They placed it in a case and people stood before it and told each other what it meant. A school group passed with the fluorescent hope children carry, and a teacher said the word ritual as if it were a sticker that made cabinets easier to open. Visitors said it would smell faintly of skin. They lowered their voices then, because the word skin is a private thing in public. They said the eyes blinked during storms. Nobody wrote that on a plaque. Back in the city, I ran tests with the samples of forests let me take. Sap dried into amber streaks that held bubbles shaped like seeds or like breath. Under the lens, I found cells I could not name without making a fool of myself. They were plant enough to ignore a stain meant for mammals and human enough to trip a test that would wreck a grant application if you did not know how to explain context to the right people. Mateo called for his recovery bed and told me not to talk to the wrong people. He was right. He is often right about my mouth. I took a drop of the sap to a clinic with a friend who owes me favors. I told him it was a contaminant from an unknown specimen. He ran it through the panel that clears paperwork for import and export. He told me it was human. He told me, eyebrows up, that the mitochondrial DNA was a partial match to mine. He asked if I had bled into a sample. I said no, and I could feel my wrist vines tighten, and then ease when I corrected myself to not knowingly. I did not think I lied. I think I was not the only one breathing when the slide was made. You might think this is where the story ends, with a lab sheet and a shiver. That is not how living things work. At night, when storms roll in and the city pretends to be a forest for a few hours, I wake with my hands on my chest. I feel the ghost of wood against them, a polite pressure like a reminder to breathe on the correct count. I do not use words like curse. I do not use words like blessing. I say I am adjusting to a rhythm. If you have ever gotten used to a clock that ticks wrong, you know what I mean. The museum sent a courier package 2 months later. Inside was a donor brochure with a photograph of the mask in its glass. Someone had taken the time to buff fingerprints off the case. You could see where their cloth left arcs of cleared mist at breathing height. In the corner of the photo, a child had touched the glass and left a perfect oval. On the brochure back, someone had scribbled, no name, just a sentence. Do not bring anything that knows your breath into a room that pretends to be dead. I put the brochure on my fridge to make the kitchen honest. I still hear cicadas pause in my head before big decisions. The pause is a metronome. It makes my chest quiet. It reminds me I am not the only person in the room who knows how to listen. I do not visit the grove. I do not pretend I could return anything that has learned to keep time with me. Sometimes I dream from behind eye holes that are not mine. Roots cross my vision like nerves. I wake with the taste of wood on my tongue and the certainty that the forest hopes I am eating well. If this feels like a warning, I hope it is. If it feels like an invitation, that is between you and whatever grows when abandoned. Keep your promises small in places where silence is weight. Do not lie to a vine. It knows. Do not tell a museum a grave is a story. It knows that too. And if something breathes when you lift it, set it down before it learns the shape of your breath. I say this like advice. It is also a confession dressed as science, because some truths are easier to hand to strangers than to the people who love you. Months from now, if a storm rattles your windows and the power drops for a second, and the air in your living room smells like a drawer in a grandmother's house, do me a favor and count your breaths. See if something in the room chooses to count along. I am not asking you to be afraid. I am asking you to notice. The forest never stops making. It is only polite enough to wait for an answer. If you hear cicadas cut out right before lightning arrives, that is not silence. That is the sound of roots listening for a name. Story 5. Echoes in the Kapok Tree. It wasn't my voice that came back from the tree. It was my father's. I said hello into the hollow, and a breath later the same word returned with a slow warmth. The faint rasp he carried after too many nights in wet air, the smile he could hide in a single vowel. The kapok trunk sighed between us, a chestnut breathing through its own ribs, and I could smell honey bark and damp fiber, like a home that had remembered soup. If you have ever heard someone gone speak from a place that should be empty, you know how your bones learn to listen, even when your mind runs. My name is Daniel. I learned how to hold a microphone before I learned how to hold a grudge, but I kept both. 10 years ago, my father died in this jungle during the last week of a project he named Resonance, chasing a rumor that certain trees could catch voices and keep them for nights that needed them. The report said exposure, confusion, a fall. The final audio log on his old drive ended with a warning inside a breath. It is speaking through the kapok. Don't answer. I brought his silver locket, the battered recorder, and a watch that breaks every time it reaches 2:44 in the morning. Naira met me at the old field station with a thermos and a look that measured my stubbornness. She knew the trails like the backs of her hands, no scars. People in the village say the forest keeps unfinished conversations. She says this with a smile that forgives our cities for calling that superstition. She taught me to step wide of the nurse logs that look like benches, to gnaw at certain strangler figs as if they were doorways that prefer courtesy. When the moon is high, she told me, the air learns to listen. She told me not to press my ear into anything that calls my name softly. The kapok was taller than my certainty and wider than my need. Its buttress roots spread like sails that got wind and settled to sleep, and at their center a hollow breathed, round as a mouth. Glowing fungi threaded the root edges, dim in the wet daylight. Little stars waiting for a night that needed naming. Birds talked in short lines from the canopy. Then they stopped, all at once, as if a conductor had raised a hand. In that pause, the wind climbed into the hollow and came out with a vowel that fit my father's voice, and the hair on my forearms went up like small listeners. I told myself what any kind son of scientist would. Hidden radio, prank, ventriloquism from a pocket I hadn't checked. The old recorder in my bag buzzed awake, without my thumb on the switch. The tape will turn like it had been waiting for the right air pressure. Static resolved into words that were now on the files I have listened to until they were furniture in my head. Welcome back, son. The fungi brightened as if they liked the frequency of that sentence, pulsing in slow approval. I felt ridiculous for noticing their rhythm, and more ridiculous for counting it. We set 2 condenser mics at the hollow's lip, and a hydrophone in the rain puddle that hugged a root. Naira hung back where the leaf litter dipped. The night settled with a long exhale, thick and sweet, and I rolled the first take. Ambient insects. Small animals doing soft business. A distant frog bragging. Playback added a soft count under the noise. 1 voice, then 2, then 4, low as breath in the next room. I tried a sign sweep at varying volumes. The fungi brightened and dimmed as if they were children agreeing. The birds fell silent every time I hit the high harmonics, then spoke again like nothing had happened. Kapok's trap breath, Naira said, like explaining how jars work to someone who has only seen bowls. Not air. What you put in comes back hungry for the rest. I laughed too quickly and asked if the forest charged interest on oxygen. Humor is a buoy the night punctures when it wants to see if you can swim. I leaned toward the hollow and heard my name slip out of it a heartbeat before I said anything. The watch on my wrist ticked smooth to 2:43, trembled, and then sulk without moving, the second hand kissing the 12 like it liked the taste. It is one thing to study echo and another to feel echoes study you. When I asked a personal question out loud, the battery on my primary recorder bled by 10% in a single minute. When I asked again, the fungi along the outer ring of roots dimmed and the ones inside the hollow pulsed brighter, like a crowd taking a breath together before a chant. I said my father's name with more control than I felt. The answer was a sentence he used to say on Saturday mornings when we would fix broken speakers instead of cleaning the kitchen. Easy, easy. Let the sound come to you. I had promised myself I would not bring the argument here. The last conversation we had before his trip was a bad song stuck in my teeth for years. I told him his second life in jungles was a romance with the echo of his first. He told me I believed in data to avoid believing in anything that could leave me. Neither of us apologized. The recorder in my lap played the argument back with the crackle of a time we had not yet lived, and then it added my responses. I never spoke, the better versions, the ones my throat learned later. Sorry, come home after this. Okay, I will go with you next time. Naira knelt and drew a ring around the hollow with powdered bark, a precaution her grandmother taught her that I tried not to dignify with flinch. She sang a low line that fit under the insects like a foundation under a house. The chant rose and her voice rose with it, and then a second Naira answered from the hollow, careful and kind, correcting pronunciation like a teacher who loves you. The locket on my chest warmed under my shirt as if a hand had found it. I took it out. My father's photo had faded in the years since the funeral. That night, under fungi light, the eyes paled further, like paper learning how to forget. The heartbeat began as a rumor under my feet. The soil around the buttress throbbed like a sleeping animal sighed. The hollow matched it, a deeper drum. When I spoke, a second Daniel began finishing my sentences wrong, filling in the place where I would reach for humor with warmth, where I would reach for a fact with a mercy. It is unnerving to be improved upon by something that wears your consonants like borrowed clothes. My name from that mouth sounded like the version of me that leaves voicemails instead of texts. The echo asked, in my tone to be finished. Naira put a hand on my sleeve and then slumped against a root. Her body is strong, but night has a way of gathering your weight and carrying it somewhere you cannot find. I was alone with devices that thought they were radios and a tree that believed in keeping what was given. The timestamp on the recorder reset, 2:44. The watch hand trembled like it wanted to run and remembered it had nowhere to go. Every echo felt like it shaved a sliver off my breath and kept it. The air thinned at mouth height. I sat because my balance had become a rumor someone else was telling. Hidden radio interference was my best red herring. I wanted wires stapled to bark and teenagers with walkie-talkies, and a stolen recorder feeding my head my worst need. I scanned the band slowly, slowly. The noise rose where it should fall, fell where it should spike. A small tremor lined up with my pulse on the screen, not on the room. The interference was a heartbeat, mine, or someone close enough to borrow it. The hollow remembered it first, then taught it to the roots, and every time I spoke, the pattern got louder. I killed the scan, and the faint thumping continued for 3 beats, like it wanted to show me it did not need me to continue. Naira came back to herself with a small cough, and the air smelled like the first rain in the city after a long dry. There's a kind of tree that remembers voices, she said. They did not keep them like jars. They keep them like soil keeps seed. Your father gave at the beginning of a sentence, and it has been waiting for the rest. She did not use words like ghost. She did not need to. If you finish it, she said, the breath becomes a root. Roots don't move far. You will not move far either. The recorder clicked as if to clear its throat. My father's voice came as easy as sleep. You have to breathe for me now. He said it like fathers say, hand me that wrench. He said it like he had been standing outside a door, and the person inside finally turned the knob. I wanted to put my face in the hollow and be 13 and listen to him teach me which part of the speaker is a human throat. I wanted to back away and call Naira's cousins and burn the air with prayers. Want and want, both loud. I chose closure like thirsty people choose bitter water. I decided I would speak the full phrase he left unfinished in his log. The clip on my laptop ended with him inhaling, the dead inhale we all carry in our sleep, and the start of a word. The Kapok brightened at the edges as if it heard the thought. Naira shook her head once, small and fierce. Finishing a sentence is not the same as finishing a life, she said. You think you are opening a door. You think you get to leave it when you want. He warned you not to answer. Do not make his warning part of the trap. The wind died as if the forest had pursed its lips. Fog moved like a wide animal finding its bed. I lifted the recorder and pressed play long enough to get the shape of the cadence, then pressed stop so I could supply the last word with my own breath. The watch froze at 2:44. The fungi dimmed and then pulsed in time with my chest. My shadow against the root was mine for a blink and then not. My father stood where mine should be. Shoulders I knew well set against a tree, I did not. The air inside the hollow cooled like a room opening into another room. I stepped inside the buttress curve and felt it would concentrate around me like a choir. The inside of the hollow rippled faint light, green and thin, as if underwater. The recorder glass gave me my face and my father's at once, the two of us sharing a forehead where a fingerprint had smeared. I spoke the word I had been carrying for a decade. The wind harmonics braided with my voice and pulled new sentences out between my vowels and my father's consonants, and I realized the tree was less a tape and more a throat that learned multiple languages. For a moment I understood how the forest could be a choir without needing instruments. The birdsong gap returned, a cut in the canvas where no sound lived. The gap was the door. The door was the danger. I held my breath because Naira had taught me with her eyes before she spoke, and because everything inside me wanted to see if the echo could live without me. The first 2 seconds were nothing. The next 2 measured my will like a hand on the back of my head, gentle as an apology. The next 2 cut small pieces off my vision and set them aside like a cook arranging ingredients. My heart and the echo started trading beats, 1 for 1, a coin game with a price. Naira's hand found my sleeve again and pinched, a reminder that body's like oxygen. I kept still. The recorder case crackled in my grip and split along the seam like ice underfoot. It did not fall apart. It opened its mouth. The sound in the hollow surged toward the break, as if holes asked for content. The fungi flared once and steadied. I counted in my head and lost number. The echo leaned in with my father's patience. It was close enough to smell the soap he used in camp, the cheap brand that lived in our Airstreams cabinet in the driveway when I was small. I shouted the last line I remembered him teaching me in the garage when the tweeter needed to be convinced to sing. Listen carefully. I did not give it room to come back. I shoved the air forward with my chest like a poor singer bullying a note. The shout clenched something in the hollow, folded the harmonics just enough to snap a filament I could not see. The recorder's crack seam gave way with a tired sigh. The pressure in my ears spiked, a weight like diving too deep in a lake that does not like to be measured. Bright pain peeled the world away. Silence arrived like a wall I could lean against. When sound leaves, it takes company you did not know you kept. Night became a gesture. Naira's hands moved and I read them. Her mouth shaping my name and her forehead folding in concern and then smoothing because I was still here. The Kapok hollow rested. No breath in, no breath out. The air smelled like the pause after lightning when the world checks itself for new edges. I touched my chest and it moved. A small astonishment. The fungi dimmed all the way, not dying, just done with their shift. I sat down, and the butcher's root held me like furniture carved by a patient relative. Dawn examined us carefully. I could not hear it arrive, but I watched its work. Light became coin-colored on the kapok skin. Mist lifted like folded cloth being put back in a drawer. Naira shook me, gentle, and then less gentle, and I saw I had slept a little while deaf without dreams. She tapped her throat, question marks with her fingers. I touched my ear and shook my head. Her mouth turned down, and then she smiled with stubborn kindness. She lifted my hand and made me feel her pulse. Alive is a sentence the body writes when the brain is busy. The hollow was silent for the first time in my lifetime, and probably my father's. We stood there a long time, me in a noiseless picture that still had smell and weight, Naira in a world that is always more patient than I deserve. I thumbed the recorder power and got nothing. I turned the wheel and got nothing. I wanted to apologize to a device, which is its own kind of loneliness. Then Naira pressed a headphone cup to my temple, as if to give my skull the idea of listening even if my ears had retired. In that pressure, I felt a tremor, not a sound, a shape of a sound, static arranging itself to laugh. My father could laugh without moving his shoulders. He kept it tidy so it would not distract from the work. It was there, a single syllable of joy that knew it was going to be alone in here with me, and did not mind. I smiled like someone had stacked my bones in the right order again. I looked up and the locket on my chest felt heavy as a promise fulfilled. Weeks later, I stood with a group of tourists who wanted ambient jungle sounds for a meditation app. I do not know why I came back, except that people return the thresholds they survived to measure how much of themselves is still missing. I watched the time on the phone I can no longer use for calls, the one that vibrates for alarms I do not hear. At exactly 2:44, the bats shifted their path like spilled ink correcting itself, and everyone in the group lifted their recorders without speaking. The hollow looked like a mouth asleep. Their meters showed a thin breath of noise. My throat tightened like a muscle remembering a name. When they played it later in the low dining shelter, the speakers breathed out a whisper that belonged to me. Listen carefully. I had not said it that night. My voice had. The difference mattered less than it would have to me a year ago. Naira listened and closed her eyes, half happy, half sorrow. She told them it was wind finding a shape it liked. She told me, with a squeeze of my hand, that the forest keeps conversations for those who come without knives. I nodded, because agreeing sometimes is better than being right alone. There's a practical afterlife you learn when you stop hearing. Every step is a decision you make without a drum. Every sentence you write to yourself in your head is a radio program that no one else gets to tune. I found new work cutting footage to the rhythms of light and shadow, to birds' wing beats you can see if you care enough to count. My father's locket hangs beside my desk where the afternoon sun catches it like a small lucky planet. The photograph continues to fade as if developing backward. Sometimes I hold it up to the window and the blankness looks like a possibility. My watch, the trader, lives in a drawer. Once a month, I take it out when the moon swells the way a song does before a chorus. At 2:44 it ticks once, a polite tap from a house that still knows my address. I do not know if it is a kapok saying hello or time doing what time does, which is to poke you to see if you will answer. I leave the drawer open until the minute ends. I count inside my chest with a hand that is learning a new metronome, one that does not depend on sound at all. If you stand at the kapok when the birds hush, you will see the fungi pulse as if a sleeping animal dreamed of running. You might hear nothing. You might hear a word meant for someone else carried on air that remembers how to hold it. If you have ever felt spoken to by a room, a street, a doorway at the end of a long hallway, you know how to stand there without making it worse. Breathe as if you are borrowing. Leave more than you take. And if a voice you loved asks you to finish a sentence, ask yourself who needs it more. I came for closure and left with a quieter hunger. I wanted to free my father the way people want to free stories from the people who keep them safe. He had already done what he came to do. He left his last message where I would find it, and a warning in a tone that meant do not say yes to every invitation. I listened too late, and still in time. The forest is not a trap, so much as a patient archivist. It keeps breath in folders and brings them out when the moon says the room is ready. If you ever visit, and you hear a whisper that sounds like mine at 2:44, do me a favor. Put your hand on the trunk and feel how old everything is, and how nothing minds if you do not understand it right away. Then step back, even if it hurts, especially if it hurts, and give the conversation back to those who started it. I cannot hear your reply, but I can picture your mouth shaping it. Somewhere a tree is learning that shape right now, and I am learning how to live with what I did not finish. And that concludes tonight's descent into the dark heart of the jungle. You've just heard 5 terrifying tales where nature never forgets, and the forest listens longer than any human ear ever could. From the Lanterns Under the Canopy to echoes in the Kapok Tree, each story carried its own warning. Some about curiosity, some about grief, and some about the quiet price of listening when you should have stayed silent. If these stories followed you into the dark tonight, don't worry. That's just the echoes settling in. But remember, if you hear your name whispered back from the trees, don't answer. Thank you for watching and listening. If you made it this far, drop over in the comments, so I know you survived till the end. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more haunted storytelling every week. Until next time, this is Whispering Abyss, signing off. Sleep lightly. The forest might still be listening.